The topic of my talk today, as Tony mentioned, is the linguistic style of the current US President, Donald Trump. This research was done with 𝗏𝗏𝗪𝗏. After the 2016 election results came in, we found ourselves thinking about what it was linguistically that may have helped Donald Trump to connect with American voters. And we thought specifically about the US debates, the presidential debates that were held leading up to the general election. And we carried out this linguistic analysis soon after that. And then we kind of put it on the shelf for a while until we were contacted and invited to submit a book chapter to a forthcoming volume, Linguistic Inquiries into Donald Trump's Language, From Fake News to Tremendous Success. And so we wrote this up as a book chapter for that volume that will come out soon. And it's been a fun project. I think it provides interesting insights into political discourse and into some unique stylistic features that Donald Trump has. So a brief outline. I'm going to give you a bit of background on how US presidential debates work leading up to general elections for US presidents. We'll talk about Trump's language in particular and what's been said in previous linguistic research and also by the news media about Trump's language. I'll outline the goals of the study and describe the methods that I'll use to analyze the data and interpret the findings as we go along. And then for fun, at the end of the talk, I'll offer some advice for Joe Biden and Donald Trump as they prepare themselves for the 2020 presidential debates. So presidential debates have a long history, but they weren't really formalized until the 1960s. Up until then, they had kind of happened on and off and were publicized in various ways. But in 1960, there were formal debates between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon that were broadcast to TV viewers. And you can see here that after that 1960 election, there was a gap of 4 election cycles until the next one happened again. And then from 1976 until today, there have been debates before every presidential election. And you'll see that this is where my corpus comes from in a few moments. So we have John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon in the top photo in black and white. And then, of course, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in 2016. The format of presidential debates is that there are questions posed by moderators and, in some cases, audience members. And the moderators are typically prominent news anchors. The debates are often held at university campuses. There's a coin toss that determines who will get to answer the first question and also who goes first for closing statements. They get 2 minutes to answer a question, and then their opponent gets 1 minute to make a rebuttal. There are timers, but these are almost always ignored. If you've ever watched a US presidential debate, you wonder why they keep time at all, because the moderators have a difficult time cutting off the 2 candidates, and typically they talk as long as they want when they want. But then they make some closing statements at the end. There's also additional coverage that surrounds the debate. So there's pre-debate discussion from politicians and pundits. There's also post-debate analysis that comes in various forms. There's almost always pre- and post-debate polling. So they'll poll viewers before and after to see if the debate has moved them in terms of their opinion about the candidates at all. There's also fact-checking, and this is going to be important later in the talk. There are professional fact-checkers that look to verify statements made by the 2 candidates. And then in some cases, there's an announcement of a winner by various organizations, and they don't always agree on who the winner is, but they do try to say who they think performed better during the course of the debate. Okay, so many things have been said about Trump's language. Most of us here are linguists, and we've thought about Trump's language. It's kept us up at night. It's often shocking and I would say distinctive. I think we'll be able to quantify and interpret those distinctive patterns here today. But a lot of the commentary about Trump's language has come in the form of what I call folk linguistics, or people without technical expertise in linguistics who do some amount of observation or analysis about the linguistic patterns that we can see. And so people have talked about Trump's interruptions and his insults and name calling, a stream of consciousness word salad style. Talked about his use of first person pronouns, phrases such as believe me and people say. And then words such as bigly, which as far as we know, he coined. And then of course his pronunciation of huge as huge. And then people have commented on his use of racist language or nicknames, imperatives, hyperbole. And you can see these are coming from prominent sources. These are major news outlets that are making this commentary. And this article from the New York Times in the quote here says there's being crude with language, there's being loose with it, then there's being Trump, who uses words the way a toddler does marbles, grabbing the ones that are most bluntly colorful and tossing them into the air just because he can. He's oxymoronic, a nativist who can't really speak his own tongue. So you can see really strong statements are made about Trump's use of language. Let's transition now to looking at what has been said about Trump's language within the linguistic scholarship. So we have authors who have published an article on his informal speaking style, another on his rhetorical strategies, on the readability of his speech and writing, on the narrative and analytic language he uses, on his extra linguistic features such as hand gestures, the linguistic style of his tweets in an interesting article by Clark and Grieve, his discourse marking devices. Huntston, in a blog post in 2017, said that Trump deliberately sacrifices intelligence for matiness in his speech. And then others have talked about discourse markers. You can see a quote here from George Lakoff in a blog post he wrote. He says, Trump's crimes against clarity are multifarious. He often speaks in long, run-on sentences with frequent asides. He pauses after subordinate clauses. He frequently quotes people saying things that aren't actual quotes, and he repeats words and phrases, sometimes with slight variations in the same sentence. The point here is that Trump's use of language is anything but word salad. Now notice that he's contradicting what's been said by others. George Lakoff makes a strong argument that Trump's use of language is deliberate, that it's not a stream of consciousness style, but rather he knows what he's doing and he's doing it deliberately. His words and his use of grammar are carefully chosen and put together artfully, automatically, and quickly. So note that Lakoff criticizes Trump's use of certain linguistic structures as not being clear, but he talks about how it's effective for what Trump's trying to accomplish. We'll return to this debate later, and I'll try to make some commentary on what I think our data suggests about whether Trump's use of language is accidental or deliberate. Okay, so goals of the study. We're going to compare the lexical and grammatical characteristics of Donald Trump's linguistic style to that of other presidential candidates. And I'm going to be focusing on the transcripts of the US presidential debates. And I'll do 3 steps. One is a keyword analysis comparing Trump to previous candidates and Hillary Clinton. A key feature analysis, and I'll tell you what a key feature analysis is. It's a new method we've been using. And then I'll triangulate these 2 methods and try to offer some commentary on what the results suggest about Trump's use of language. The corpus, we call the presidential debates corpus. It has the transcripts of every candidate who participated in a general election debate from 1960 to 2016. 12 presidential elections, 33 separate debates. These full transcripts came from the American Presidency Project. Created a computer program to segment all of these transcripts by speaker so that we have separate files, one for each speaker from each debate, giving us 69 files total, or about 450,000 words. So it's a small corpus. The nice thing, though, is it represents the entire population of general election debates. So we don't really have to think too much about sampling. We have the entire population. this is all we can learn about. So small as it is, we have an exciting data set that can show us insights that we couldn't learn any other way. Okay, so let's dive into the keyword analysis. The goal of keyword analysis is to determine the aboutness of one or more texts. Basically, we're trying to identify words that are statistically associated with a target corpus when we compare it with a reference corpus. What are those words that are strongly associated with one corpus that we don't see as much of in the other? And there are different ways of doing this. The target corpus in this case will be Trump's utterances from the 3 debates he participated in with Hillary Clinton. And the reference corpus is the utterances from all of the other transcripts, including Hillary Clinton. I'm using what I call corpus frequency keyness. Those of you who are familiar with the article Doug Biber and I published recently on text dispersion keyness may be wondering why we're not using our own method that we came up with. The reason is because you need multiple texts. You need many texts for that to work well. And because we only have 3 texts for Trump, it doesn't really make sense to be looking at dispersion across 3 texts. So the corpus frequency approach works well here. Basically what we're doing is we're taking all of the language from Trump as a big blob, and we're counting the frequencies of all of the words he uses in those 3 texts, and then we're comparing it with the frequencies of those words in all of the other texts combined with all of the different presidential candidates. And then we used ant-conc and extracted all the words that met what's called the keyword statistic threshold. And then we attempted to classify all the words semantically or functionally. And then we would go into the text and use concordance lines and try to figure out what the words are doing in their respective contexts. And this is really important. Often with keyword analysis, we end up cherry picking words we like. We go through the list and we say, take the first 1,000 words, and we take 100 words from those 1,000 that we like or we feel are interpretable. I think we need more accountability to the data than that. And so we have tried to find a category for every single word in the list. If it's there, there's a reason for it, and we've worked to make sense of it. We've also tried to address what I'm calling the diachronic effect. Basically, things have changed over time. Issues that are hot topics in American politics have changed from the 1960s. And I've tried to deal with those words to make sure that they're not showing up as key for Trump when really it's about diachronic change and it's not about Trump's style. And so when we could, we eliminated those words. Basically, I ran a separate keyword analysis with Hillary Clinton's language compared with all of the other speakers. And any of the words that overlapped between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump's keyword list was eliminated. And those were, you'll see on the next slide what those words looked like. And then when we had words that seemed to be related to this particular election, we would account for historical context. Okay, so the keyword analysis revealed 133 keywords that were on Donald Trump's list and only 52 keywords for Hillary Clinton. This shows that Donald Trump uses 2.5 times more words that are key to him than his opponent did, showing, I think, that his style is more distinctive. There were 13 keywords that were shared by the two. So those are not counted in the 133 and the 52. And we have a couple of adverbs like really and so, but also a lot of words that are related to that particular election, like ISIS. And Lester was one of the moderators, Lester Holt. And then Bernie Sanders, Barack, Putin. You can see that these are related to 2016 and they wouldn't have been mentioned in 1960. Okay, so we're gonna go through these categories that we came up with for the keywords, and each of the slides will look the same. At the top will be the linguistic feature, or the linguistic interpretation. And then the first column is the keywords listed that fell into this category. The middle column will have text excerpts to give you examples of things that Trump said. Unless I note otherwise, these are all quotes from Trump. later on in the talk, you'll see some quotes from other candidates, but the first 20 slides or so, all of the quotes come from Donald Trump from one of the debates. And then in the third column, I tried to offer some interpretive commentary on what we thought was happening with the use of these keywords when we look at all of them together. The interpretations are not necessarily related just to these text excerpts, but to all of the examples of language use we saw with relation to the keywords we're talking about. Okay, so to start, pronouns. You can see here, she, you, her, they, and it. Trump used all of these pronouns much more frequently than his opponent or than other candidates. And you can see in these quotes here, a lot of vague references to they, and it's not clear who they refers to at all. There's no reference that we can see. Also, it's related to what we call a fast-paced narrative, with Donald Trump often sharing anecdotes as asides or tangents in the form of short stories, and the use of these pronouns are functioning in that way. And then you can see in the second quote, a lot of his speech is repetition in parallel structures. So you can see here, the use of they happens 3 times in a row in the same structure. Unless they're taking our jobs, they're giving incentives, they're doing things that frankly we don't do. This was so common. He would repeatedly use these parallel structures, and often the pronouns would find themselves in those. Okay, contractions. Trump used contractions a lot more than other candidates. A lot of them had negations in there, like don't, didn't, can't, hasn't, but there were other contractions as well. And we saw some in one of the previous excerpts. They're online waiting. We're going to speed up the process bigly because it's very inefficient, but they're online and they're waiting to become citizens. We related this to a colloquial style. Contractions are strongly related to fluency in speech. They allow us to articulate the phonology of a language much more quickly and easily, and so they make speech more fluent and colloquial, and this could be related to his off-the-cuff, unplanned style, and then we also see a lot of negation. Okay, a lot of words related to attacks on Clinton. All of these keywords can be directly linked to something Trump was saying to attack Hillary Clinton. So things related to the email scandal, or Benghazi, or her lack of stamina, or her husband Bill Clinton, or how she was outsmarted or outplayed. And you can see in this quote, outsmarted and outplayed worse than anybody I've ever seen in government whatsoever. And this is related to a critical stance Trump is taking of his opponent, insults, and then they're very specific to Hillary Clinton. And in some cases, he criticized other people, but all of these are related to Clinton. Okay, several words that are related to Trump defending himself against attacks from Clinton or from others, often through the moderator. So things related to financial audits, or the Access Hollywood tapes where Trump was recorded making lewd comments to Billy Bush. The title of this talk, "It's Just Words, Folks, It's Just Words," that's a quote from one of the debates where he was responding to the Access Hollywood tapes. He was asked directly about what he said in those tapes, and he said, "It's just words, folks, it's just words." And he referred to that as locker room talk and so on. But you can see here in this excerpt, he's defending his financial stability and his track record as a businessman. Often these were a defensive stance he was taking, but also he would use these as ways to turn around the discourse from one of defense to one of self-aggrandizement, and shifting the topic to something more positive that would work in his favor. Okay, so issues and policies. We get a few keywords here. Trump didn't talk a lot about substantive issues and policies. You can't find a lot of evidence in the debate transcripts of him telling the American public specifically what would he do if he were to become president. But we do have a few examples of policies he took a stance on. Those include immigration issues, the stop and frisk policy, or the importance of retaining US businesses and not letting them go international. Business deals and negotiation, you get words like deals, trade, cash. And this excerpt here is a good example of how Trump would often talk about the corporate business world in a political context. You have to be able to negotiate our trade deals. You have to be able to negotiate. So this is related to his mentality as a businessman, and kind of this metaphor of United States as a corporation, Trump as its CEO. And we've seen that continue since he became president. And it's unsurprising. He spent his life in the private business sector, with this being his first foray into the political world. And so for him to think this way makes sense, but we saw a lot of these words being repeated. Okay, so words related to stance and evaluation, there are many of these. Evaluative, adjectives, and other words. Bad, disaster, horrible, irredeemable, unbelievable, depreciation, defective, stupidity, tremendous, and so on. These are words that probably stuck out to us when we were hearing them, but you can see when they're all put together, we get repeated examples of Trump taking a strong evaluative stance about things. A lot of those were negative, most of them were negative, talking about previous policies. But some of them, like the use of the word great, had to do with his campaign slogan, Make America Great Again. And that's an example of him using one of these evaluative words for a positive message. A lot of it was fear-based rhetoric. The language is vague. It's hard to know for sure what is meant by horrible. Of course, it tells us that you think negatively about that, but you haven't specifically described how horrible is defined or what you mean by it. It just comes across as being negative, and I think it gets the viewers to be emotionally engaged, but often they don't know for sure why it is that it's horrible. And so there's a fair bit of extreme language and hyperbole that ends up being vague and nondescript. Okay, involvement. This was really, really important. We only get 4 words here, but they're repeated many, many times in the corpus. Look at these excerpts here and you'll see how Trump was talking directly to the moderators or to his opponent or to the American public, more so than we see other candidates doing. So he talks to Lester Holt. Wait a minute, Lester. You asked me a question. Did you ask me a question? It's uncommon to interact with the moderator that much in a debate setting. But also, look at these 3 examples of the word look. And I will tell you, you look at the inner cities, and you can go look it up. And if you look at CNN, these are all indirect ways that he's interacting with the public viewers and helping them to feel some level of involvement in the debate. Emphatics and absolutes, these don't come as a surprise if we paid attention to Trump's language. Very, many, nothing, much, all, lots, ever, nobody, totally, no. So a lot of extreme language that makes it quite clear how strongly he feels about something, even though it ends up being vague a lot of the time. Nobody has more respect for women than I do. And then referring to Hillary Clinton, she's got bad judgment, and honestly, so bad that she should never be president of the United States. That I can tell you. A lot of hyperbole. The stance is unambiguous, but the message is often quite ambiguous. And so that brings us to vague language. Hundreds, millions, and thousands are words he would use repeatedly. He would also refer to places, things, and thing which didn't actually have a referent that we knew of based on the context. But look at these 3 examples of hundreds, thousands, and millions. He liked to use this structure with hundreds and hundreds, thousands and thousands, and millions, but didn't give us a specific number, an exact number of how many hundreds, how many thousands, and how many millions. So we get a lot of hyperbole, and there's a lack of linguistic precision. He's not being precise about how many there actually are. The interesting thing is, in many of these cases, what he was saying was technically accurate, just linguistically vague, and I think it was strategic. So one example is at the bottom of the excerpts, what she doesn't say is that President Obama has deported millions and millions of people. Well, up until that date, under the Obama administration, there had been 2.4 million people deported. So technically, Trump was right. There were millions and millions because there were more than 1 million. However, millions and millions probably leads the imagination of the American public to think about a number much bigger than 2 million. So fact checkers have commented on how difficult it is to fact check Trump. Verifying President Trump's statement beyond reasonable doubt is more difficult than when previous presidential level politicians. They say that it's really hard to pin things down because he's so vague, but when they finally get to the bottom of some of these things, they find out, well, technically millions and millions, one way of defining it is 2 million or more, so it was correct. It's just possibly a bit misleading. Okay, so that takes care of the words. There's many more patterns we found. I've sort of summarized the main ones. And we'll come back to some of those patterns in a few minutes when we triangulate those results with the key feature analysis. But before the key feature analysis, the goal of this method is to identify key functional characteristics of texts by finding lexical grammatical structures that are statistically more frequent in a target corpus than in a reference corpus. So it's very much in the same spirit of keyword analysis, but instead of comparing the frequencies of words between two corpora, we compare the frequencies of grammatical structures. So the corpus gets, both corpora get tagged. We tag them using the Viber tagger. And then we selected in advance 66 linguistic structures that we thought would be important for looking at this type of discourse. And I'll show you what some of those are throughout. And then we compute Cohen's d for each of the features, comparing the two corpora to each other. And Cohen's d is a standardized mean difference. So it's a way of taking two means from two different data sets and comparing them on a standard scale. So for those of you who have used Cohen's d before, you probably remember, you know, between 0.2 and 0.5 is small, 0.5 to 0.8 is medium, and 0.8 and above is a large effect size according to Cohen. So you get this standard scale where regardless of the data or the study, you can look at how different two data sets are. And then that allowed us to get large positive values, and those were strongly associated with Donald Trump's use of grammar, and then strong negative values, and those were strongly associated with the other candidates, or they were negatively associated with Trump's language. And then we rank ordered the features. So you can act like a keyword analysis, you can rank order the features based on which is most key for Trump, all the way down to those that are most key for the presidential candidates. And we focused on d values that were greater than 0.8, but you'll see in some cases they were much greater than that. And then, like the keyword analysis, we attempted to classify all of these structures according to their discourse functions. Interestingly, you sort of get results that look something like a multidimensional analysis and the dimensions that emerge, except instead of the statistic looking at correlations and identifying those dimensions, as in a multidimensional analysis, the key feature analysis are features that emerge independently of each other, and we look for discourse links among them. We don't have enough texts in this corpus to do a multidimensional analysis, but I think that the patterns that would emerge would be quite similar. But there are certainly times when a key feature analysis can tell us things that an MD analysis couldn't, and we have been excited by this method every time we've used it. Okay, key feature analysis. So if you compare Trump to the previous candidates, there are 39 features that were key to him of the 66, meaning they were above 0.8. You can see his range was from negative 2.83. Those are the ones that were strongly associated with other candidates, all the way to almost 4. Some of the features associated with Trump were almost an effect size of 4. The interpretation for that is that Trump's average for that feature is 4 standard deviations above the average for the rest of the candidates. 4 standard deviations is a long way between two means. Clinton only had 25 key features emerge, and you can see the range was much smaller. Again, it seems like she was just less distinctive. Trump was more different from previous candidates than Clinton was, both lexically and grammatically. Okay, so let's talk about key features of Donald Trump. The first set are related to narrative. third person pronouns, past tense verbs, communication verbs, and the pronoun it. These should look familiar to anyone who's done multidimensional analysis and has seen a narrative dimension emerge. He says, I then spoke to Sean Hannity, which everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity. I had numerous conversations with Sean Hannity at Fox, and Sean Hannity said, and he called me the other day, and I spoke to him about it. He said you were totally against the war because he was for the war. So he has these asides where he shares a quick anecdote. The context here was related to whether Hillary Clinton was for the war in Iraq or not, but he takes this sidetrack and talks about a conversation he had with Sean Hannity. So we get anecdotal evidence for his claims and also this fast-paced narrative that we've seen in the keyword results. Okay, so this is really important. This key feature dimension that we're seeing here, we're calling impersonal stance. Now, this became really tricky because we found a set of stance-related features that were strongly associated with Donald Trump. We also found a set of stance-related features that were strongly related to the other candidates. And we had to go to work to figure out what made them different. Why were we seeing stance features on both ends? We couldn't just say Trump uses more stance. We had to pin down what made his stance different. And it turns out, I think we have compelling evidence that Trump uses what we call an impersonal stance, a stance where the possessor of that stance cannot be explicitly identified. So he'll make a claim, but if you ask, well, who possesses the stance? Who owns that claim? You actually can't pin it down. You don't know for sure because it hasn't been made explicit. So amplifiers, emphatics, stance adverbs, modals of necessity. We have things like this second quote, nobody's ever seen that before. They turned out to be wrong. It was actually 1.7 billion in cash. Obviously, I guess for the hostages, it certainly looks that way. Well, obviously for who? Certainly for who? It isn't clear. Is it Trump that feels certain about this, or is it something that is certain to all of us, or to a particular author or speaker who said this before? It isn't clear. It's this impersonal stance where the possessor isn't identified. So we get a lot of certainty with very little evidentiality or no evidentiality at all. There's no linguistic accountability. From a language standpoint, it's impossible to know who's accountable for that stance, who owns it. And then it makes it very difficult to fact check. How do you fact check something when you're not even sure who they were referring to as the person who made that claim? We'll see when we get to the other presidential candidates, a very different type of stance that is not impersonal at all. It's very much stance that the speakers are taking ownership of. Okay, subjective commentary. So a lot of these are related to what we saw in the keyword analysis, but we get size adjectives and a lot of different types of verbs. He talks about Honest Abe and big differences between Honest Abe and Hillary, and then jumps to saying that he doesn't know Putin. Vague language, taking a critical stance, expression of personal opinion, some hyperbole, but very subjective. There aren't technical facts in this excerpt. These are Trump's opinions, his subjective views of things. Involvement in interaction we see emerge again, this time in grammar rather than in lexis. Second person pronouns, all personal pronouns, WH questions all emerge with strong positive effect sizes. And you know what she should have done? You know, Hillary, what you should have done? You should have changed the law when you were United States Senator. If you don't like it because your donors and special interests are doing the same thing as I do, except even more so. So you get this direct interaction with his opponent or the moderator or the public viewers, and then a lot of rhetorical questions. And this is entrenched in Donald Trump's style. We see it all the time. We even see it in tweets, I think. Okay, let's jump to some of the key features of other presidential candidates. Here are the winners of the previous elections. We don't see the other candidates here, but everyone from JFK all the way to Barack Obama preceding Donald Trump. So to be clear, these are key features that are key for the presidential candidates other than Donald Trump. So everything I'm about to show you is strongly unrelated, is strongly not associated with Donald Trump, These are things he didn't do that all of the other or at least some of the other presidential candidates relied heavily on. So there's this personal stance. Now pay attention here. We get all these stance features. Two clauses, that clause is controlled by stance verbs, adjective plus that stance clauses. And what makes these different is that the possessor of the stance is made explicit. It's clear who has this stance. Instead of just saying obviously, certainly, actually, it's clear here that the stance is held, in most cases, by the speaker who's making the claim. I don't believe, I think, I believe. This offers linguistic accountability. The speaker is saying, I'm the one who's accountable for this stance. And if you want to get to the bottom of where this idea came from, I'm telling you now, it came from me. It's what I think or believe. So it's often lower in certainty. You can see that words like think and believe have less certainty than certainly and obviously, but they have higher evidentiality because we know who the holder of the stance is. And we call this personal stance, tied to a person. Okay, now some more obvious ones. As linguists, I think we would sort of expect these next two to emerge. Technical description. Look at these features over on the left. We get abstract nouns and process nouns and quantity nouns and technical nouns, and also this type token ratio. Look at this quote from Ronald Reagan. He's talking about gross national product and productivity, personal earnings, fixed income, poverty line. Look at all these facts and statistics he's rattling off. They're objective, they can be fact-checked, there's specific policies or statistics that he's using, and then there's this specialized, technically precise language, very precise. These numbers, 3,000 is different from thousands and thousands. It's very technically precise. We don't see this in Donald Trump's use of language. It also suggests that these presidential candidates in previous elections have come prepared. This is semi-scripted. I think these are things that he probably memorized on note cards before going out on stage to make sure that he got the facts right. I don't picture Donald Trump doing a lot of memorizing of note cards before he goes out into a debate setting. Informational density, nominalizations, pre-modifying nouns, prepositions, attributive adjectives. These are classic phrasal complexity features, and they're emerging in speech, not in academic writing. So this is George W. Bush. We can do a better job. Clean coal technologies, cleanest coal technologies, short-term, reservoirs of domestic production, hemispheric energy policy, and so on. This suggests, again, a pre-planned scripted speech, a lot of technical information that's quite dense. And I think it appeals to educated voters, those who are up to date on the political issues and can understand the relevance and significance of some of these facts and details. We don't see this in Donald Trump's speech very much during the debates. Finally, possibility, and there's only one feature here, modals of possibility. But I thought this was important, that we get possibility and references to future time made by other candidates in ways we don't see from Donald Trump. It was actually difficult for the moderators and Hillary Clinton to get Donald Trump to make solid commitments on what exactly would happen if he took office. But here we have Barack Obama talking about what could potentially happen and what we may not see. This has quite a bit of hedging in the language, but it also gives some sort of vision for the future as best we can conjure it up, and maybe suggestions of future results or consequences of policies that would be made. Okay, so that brings us to triangulation of the two analyses. What did we learn that was consistent between the keyword and key feature analyses? Well, we get a narrative style emerge in both, an impersonal stance, involvement and interaction come up in both methods. We also get some features that only emerged in one method or the other. So in the keyword analysis, we got more details about attacks on opponents, policies, negotiation. Those are semantic, and we don't get them in the grammar, which is largely functional. the key feature analysis helped us to see technical and informational language emerge. It also helped us to see the difference between personal stance and impersonal stance that turned out to be quite important. Okay, summing up, Donald Trump's speaking style is linguistically distinctive. There's strong evidence for that. I think a lot of the findings from this study confirmed prior claims that just weren't supported by data. They were sort of anecdotal or based on observation. We have a lot of support now quantitatively for those things, but also we've introduced previously undiscovered characteristics of Trump's speaking style, both lexically and grammatically. And then the triangulation of the two methods revealed consistent as well as complementary findings. I care a lot about triangulation, and I think here, these two methods together offered us a much richer picture than we could have gotten from either of them independently. Okay, now let's get back to that great debate from the beginning. Is Trump's language stream of consciousness word salad, or is it artful and deliberate? 𝗏𝗂𝗃 said his words and his use of grammar are carefully chosen and put together artfully, automatically, and quickly. Hunston said it could be that this is the only way he knows how to speak. I think our evidence suggests that 𝗏𝗂𝗃 was probably right. For the record, Susan Hunston wasn't saying that's where she stood. She was just saying that's one way we could interpret his speech. But George 𝗏𝗂𝗃 took a much firmer stance, and I think our evidence suggests that there was a lot of deliberate style in Trump's speech and language. This is a style that has worked for him for decades in New York City real estate and as a reality TV star. He knew it connected with people. He knew it worked well. It seems that simplified language, a colloquial tone, impersonal stance, and an evolved style worked in his favor in many cases. His stylistic strategies helped him to become what some business people refer to as a disruptive innovator. Politically and linguistically, we can't really argue with the fact that Trump has been disruptive. And in the business world, this is viewed as a good thing. When the business world is disrupted, it's viewed as a positive thing for economics, at least in a capitalist sense. And here, I think he did that politically and linguistically. And then finally, I think that political discourse, presidential debates in the US won't ever be the same again. I think the rules have changed, and many of the expectations that we come to a debate with probably won't be there. I think we're in for an exciting set of debates between Trump and Biden. Okay, some unsolicited linguistic advice. I'm grateful that Donald Trump and Joe Biden have found the time to join us today. They're here. No, I'm just joking. They're not here with us. And they'll never see this advice, so I can say whatever I want, right? No, I think based on what we've seen, it might be fun to kind of think about what linguistically might help these two candidates be successful in the debates. So Donald Trump makes it hard for fact checkers, and the public likes fact checking. So maybe it would be good if he helped the fact checkers out by being specific, precise, and offering some linguistic accountability. Unscripted seems to work. People seem to resonate with that, at least some people, but also coming prepared in case he is in a position where he's asked to be specific. He would want to be prepared and not go off the cuff entirely. Stories seem to be effective, but keep them relevant, Donald. I think continuing to connect with the voters, that seems to work really well, but I think Trump should remember that 2016 and 2020 are so very different. The world is different, the United States is different, and he may need to be adaptable and change some of his strategies because I'm not sure his audience looks very much like it did in 2016. Okay, dear Joe, I would suggest to Joe Biden that he doesn't play the insult game. I think he'll lose every time. That's a game that Trump has perfected, and I think Biden should keep his hands clean and focus on issues. Hold Trump linguistically accountable. If he says millions and millions, ask him, can you tell us exactly how many million? I think he should also connect with the viewing public as much as possible and avoid technical jargon. Now, specifics are good. Technical jargon that a lot of your audience won't understand, I don't think works in politicians' favor. It makes them sound credible, but it doesn't resonate with the public who doesn't understand the issues, and many don't. Come prepared, but not scripted. And I would recommend that Biden talks less and lets Trump go ahead and do the talking. I think it would probably work in his favor. Biden, again, different linguistic issue, but he's been known to make quite a few gaffes when he's talking publicly. I would say he should aim for the high standard of no gaffes during any of the debates. We'll see how he does. For both of the candidates, I would say be kind out there. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. I like to think that I'm not the only person who's ready for a bit more of that. Thanks.